Hello, everyone. Welcome to the public newsroom. So exciting to see so many faces pop up and starting to see folks type things into the shared agenda. We're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome if this is your first time here. This is the public newsroom. This is a free monthly workshop series that we offer to talk about local issues, the role of local media, and building pathways of civic power. And today we're going to get into a little bit of all three of those, actually. If you don't know us, City Bureau is a nonprofit newsroom here in Bronzeville. We aim to serve the South and West sides, and we also try and bring people into creating journalism through a couple different ways, this workshop series being one of them. If you don't know me, my name is Ellie, and I manage this workshop series for City Bureau. And tonight we're going to be talking about the city budget. The city budget is something that affects us all really concretely, but that not everybody gets to be a part of shaping. And today we're going to be asking you what you think about the budget, comparing the budget that we make together with the actual city budget, learning a little bit more about the budget breakdown and how the budget is made, and also sharing some ways that you can help shape the budget next year and in years to come. We're doing that with the truly incredible, talented, committed people that make up the People's Budget Chicago team. So I'm gonna go ahead and ask Paula, who designed the People's Budget process, just to share a little bit more about what the People's Budget is before we dive in.
Wonderful. So, and also with me today are wonderful team members from People's Budget, many of them. And we've been working on People's Budget for over a year now as a community center process, both to learn about how do we position a question around what do our communities need to be safe and thriving, with the perspective of prioritizing our investment, and how do we do that in engaging our most impacted communities, or Black and Brown communities. The process, and you experience that a little bit more today, but it's basically laid out in three different kind of parts or components. The first one is around how do we acknowledge history, and how do we reflect on the values that are driving our decision making in our communities. How do we decide as a collective, as communities, what do we want to invest in? So that's the first part. The second part is about how do we actually allocate our dollars, right? Like how do we learn to prioritize and discuss and come about with how do we together choose and select and allocate investment in the different areas and topics. And then lastly, the third part is about how do we connect with our elected officials in the first place, who are the ones who are directly involved in decision making about the budget, to talk about the priorities for our communities. So how do we articulate and structure demands, but also how we organize and coordinate that messaging around what are the priorities for our communities. So it's a process that is layered and it's rooted in reflection, and then design, and then ultimately a framework of accountability, specifically with our elected officials, including our older people, and of course our mayor. So we hope you can learn also more. I'm going to put in the chat the resources that we've been creating through the People's Budget website, but I think that's, as an overall, it's also the second year that we've been doing this engagement in person, virtual, experimenting with different ways of bringing conversation to our communities and involving as much folks as possible in learning and sharing the process of city budget making. Back to you, Ellie.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paula. So for today, if you have been to the public newsroom before, you know we usually have a presentation or a panel, and then we sort of break out into smaller rooms to do an activity. Today is a little bit different in that we're actually going to be in breakout groups for most of the session, and you'll be in a breakout group with either Troy, Kiara, excuse me, or Vanessa D. So if those people could just sort of like wave at the camera so folks know, thank you guys so much. They're awesome. I'm so excited for them to get into the activity with you all. And I'll let them introduce themselves in their own groups. All right, so before we go off into our groups to go through this People's Budget workshop, does anyone have any questions before we split off? Okay, cool.
So what is the People's Budget Chicago? Every year, the city of Chicago undertakes the process of defining the budget for our city. The Peaceful Budget is an inclusive community-led process to define budget values and priorities for the city that centers the needs and priorities of our most impacted communities, creates accountability framework, and ultimately designs a budget that works for all of us. How are we doing this? So we get these different categories that are mainly funded, and you get these sub-agencies that get a piece of the pie. So, okay.
Sorry about that. Sorry.
No problem. But throughout the process, we are going to try to construct our own budget based on, I guess, the mission statement that's written above that I just read. So hopefully we can stay in that mind frame as we get to facilitating this event and you guys constructing your own budget. Okay.
Cool, thanks. So I'm sure you all are familiar with group agreements, but we'll be making some together, especially since we'll be in community with each other, creating our own budget, which really are just commitments that we're making to ourselves and to one another to make this a brave space for all of us. So we've outlined a couple that we've used with other workshops that we've done. I'll read them off. Of course, these are your group agreements. So if there are any that we don't want, we take them out. If there's anything we need to add, we add it. So make space, take space. If you feel like you might be taking up a lot of airtime, maybe just taking a step back so other folks can add. Similarly, encouraging yourself to engage in whichever way feels best, whether that's unmuting in the chat. Confidentiality, taking the lessons, leaving the details, be open to learning, be open to someone else speaking their truth. And most importantly, especially as we engage in these kinds of conversations, self-care and community care. So pay attention to your bladder, your neighbors. If you need some water, get some water. If you want your camera off, turn your camera off. Whatever feels good for you. And throughout this process, as we're making these group decisions, we'll just ask folks to put a thumbs up if things look good, since this process is really like a process of community and consensus. So are there any things that we would like to take away or add?
I have one. I think the budget can be really complicated, and I think a good one for our group might be if you don't understand or you don't know something, to ask. So yeah, I think this should be a space where we can ask a lot of questions, because Chicago's budget process is super, super complicated and just like a lot going on.
Awesome, thanks for that. Does that feel like a good one to add, everyone? Just thumbs up, that feels good. Cool, I see some thumbs up. So, oh no. We said ask questions. Awesome. Anything else? Okay. So just making sure these group agreements we have are good with everyone. Thumbs up. Awesome. Okay. I'll pass it back to you.
So what do our communities need to be safe and thriving, right? And when you look at these questions, I think that it's relevant for us to look at our individual communities, right, and see the impacts, not only what you experiencing personally, but what your neighbors may be experiencing, what they have and what they don't have. It's all about community. So it's not just a selfish thing of what I and my family need. It's about what will make the community needs, make the community more safer and thriving.
Thanks for that. So we're going to do a quick activity. We'll just drop this Jamboard link in the chat, and then we'll ask folks to, sorry, I have yet to master how to share my screen on Zoom. We'll drop this Jamboard link in the chat and ask you all to add answers to this question: what do our communities need to be safe and thriving? In case folks are unfamiliar with Jamboard, this is a Jamboard we've created that I'll drop in. Right here on the left side, there's a sticky note function. You can just click on that, write anything you'd like, change the color if you'd like, and then save it. And then once you've added everything you want to add, you can take some time and read what everyone else has added and add like a check mark or an exclamation point to anything that resonates with you. So I'm going to stop sharing to add this link. And hopefully I've given everyone access to edit. If not, though, please let me know.
Y'all see how good my partner is up here? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll just cancel. And I won't put up the presentation yet. I'll just let it so that we can have some conversation to see what folks wrote down. So for me, leading by example, as always, I put small and large businesses, science and business programs to balance out all of the like arts and sports, because we have a lot of arts and sports in my community, but we don't have like science or business. And then, oh yes, thank you, Vanessa. So the question was, what do we need to keep our community safe and thriving? And then I also put better streets. And by that, I mean like not just filling the potholes, but actually like redoing it so that there's like level and like not still kind of damaging to my vehicle. And then whoever wants to go next. Dun, 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 dun.
I could jump in and see. Well, I've got, I like yours, those are good. I have owner-occupied businesses. So, maybe a program where you can kind of really, focus on that to kind of like help stabilize neighborhoods. Also like home repair programs, to help with the aging infrastructure and to help support people, in communities. Definitely youth employment and training programs for sure. I think like if this information is there, and right now I know kids on the east side have to travel long distances to get to apply for apprenticeships and things like this, and the outreach isn't always there in certain communities. Clean air and water, I didn't say that one. And mental health services for sure. Yeah, thanks.
I can go. I think what you just raised, I'm sorry, I had the worst memory ever. So what was your name? Because it says like a New World Breast. I'm like, I don't remember your name.
Linda.
Linda, thank you. I'm like Dory and Finding Nemo. I can't remember anything. I think, Linda, what you're saying about clean water, I think my mind first went to basic needs, like can we have guaranteed shelter for people, or guaranteed food, or healthcare, education, like covering the basic needs, I think would go a long way towards making communities safe. just to start with. And then the thriving part of it, I think, is like, if those basic needs are met, then you can start thinking about things like enrichment programs and public goods like libraries and parks and after school programs and everything else. But if the basic needs aren't being met, you can't get to some of the other stuff, right? Like an after school program is great, but if you have unstable housing, then it can't, I mean, I don't want to say that programs can't, you know, be the one safe space. They can be, but that, you know, there's some needs there that need to be addressed first, I think.
I like that interpretation of the question, Vanessa. I feel like my mind jumped to all of these like nice to haves. Like one of my items was like more green space, more spaces that are like purely for socializing, right? Like we don't have a lot of that in the US. And like for the question to be really like, what do our communities need, right? And like thinking about that sort of like base level first, because the budget is like a lot of money and it's sort of like hard to know how much would actually be left over if we did like really thoroughly cover those basic needs.
Yeah, the like the things that I as a way of sort of grouping it in my head, I was like, okay, what are sort of these larger like categories of need, of like there's the physical needs of like you need food and water and healthcare. And there's like spiritual needs, which is like you need like a place to go to be with other people, whether that be a church or a park. And like cultural needs of like there's like a library nearby and a theater nearby. I'd also add to like all of this is just like the ability to move around the city feels really critical in a way that's like cheap and safe. Like we live really close to an Orange Line stop, but it's like sort of scary to get there because of the cars. So like safety to public transit in addition to on public transit.
No, these are all really great points. And it makes me think of what's that called? Maslow's or hierarchy of needs. Is that how you say it? So it's like all of these things are needed. They're just on like a spectrum, right? Yes. Thanks, Vanessa. Did anyone else want to share any thoughts?
One of the things that stood out to me is just the amount of times that I've called 311 trying to get somebody who is not a police officer to help somebody who's in need of mental health services, and how I get laughed at when I ask for not a police officer to be spoken to. And I just think that's absolutely ridiculous, and that we can do so much better. So I would love to see more money being spent on actual counselors and mental health professionals rather than funding the police, and also fully funded schools.
I guess I was thinking along the lines of like meeting cultural needs and historical needs. Like there is such a deep history of people of color in the city of Chicago, and that's a history that I didn't start learning until I got to college. And so thinking about the ways that children can be exposed to that at younger ages. For example, Illinois became the first state to teach Asian American history in the curriculum, and how can more of that history be implemented in like Chicago public schools, or like how do we address the fact that like Chicago public schools are facing a dwindling population crisis, and what does that mean for communities? What's driving them away from our city?
Thank you all so much for sharing. Denise, I wanted to provide you an opportunity to share, but no pressure if you don't want to, or if you don't have the ability to. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna go ahead and start the presentation with you. So all of the things that you all mentioned are basically in our budget, with the exception of education. So when you think of education, we only include early childhood education, and that would be like pre-K through, I think that like pre-birth, like born, like 0, like to kindergarten, I believe, or 5. And that's it. It doesn't include like high school or elementary school. And so if in the activity that we're gonna do, we're gonna act as if we would have given you all tokens in real life, but now you're just gonna imagine that you have $100, right? So you have $100 bill. And then with each of that $100 bill, you have these 5 categories in which you can spread that money over. Health, which is like mental health, maternal health, HIV/AIDS prevention, and lead poisoning. Education, which as I mentioned, which is early childhood. Housing, which is like affordable housing, low income housing, and then home ownership support. Infrastructure, parks and recreation, public transportation, streets and water, and then community resources. So libraries, arts and culture, workforce services, youth and senior services, and then finally fire and emergency services. And then we have the carceral system, which is police and police accountability. So it's 6. Yes, 6. So if you all would want to write on that same piece of paper and when you put what would keep your community safe and thriving. I don't have like this to like physically give to you.
Yeah, just for the first, when you asked the question about where would you put your first dollar, I said housing, Fernanda did like a +1 kind of carrot, and then Maggie said education.
I'll put another, or I'll put one on health actually.
Anyone else?
I'll throw one on infrastructure.
I'll do another infrastructure.
Who is that? I'm sorry.
Oh, that was me, Ellie.
I'm like, it didn't go green. I didn't.
No, you're doing so many things at the same time. True MVP over here. I think Louise unmuted.
Yeah, I'll put one for health.
Did everyone put one down at least, not including myself? Linda, did you want?
Yeah, I would community resources. Please.
All right, cool. How does this look? How are you all feeling about this? If this is not the final budget, but if this was the final budget, how would you all feel about it? Yeah, thumbs up. I see no one put any money on the carceral system. Was that intentional? If so, why?
I feel like this is perfectly in line with what I was thinking for allocating for $100 in the sense of like, or I don't know if you want to go there next. I should check.
I mean, it can all blend together. We have time. I think we're going back at 7:20. So yeah, it can all blend together.
Yeah, I think just starting to think about like if we had $100, how I would have allocated it. I think I would have put a big chunk in housing and health, which each of 2 of us each chose those, followed by then I would have split the remainder between education, infrastructure, and community resources. So I feel like this aligns with where my head is at least, just because I think, again, going back to basic needs, if you think water is under infrastructure, housing, health, those all feel like basic needs to me, followed by the importance of education and having community resources.
Thank you so much for sharing. I agree with so many of your points. Would anyone else like to share?
Yeah, I think part of going through that exercise just now of thinking how to allocate the money, sort of off the top, it was like, well, we don't like the carceral system just eats so much money. Let's just not let's not throw money at that, and try to directly address people's needs. So on my mind was like, okay, like the carceral system occupies this huge place in our budget. Like, what are the things that would sort of solve the problems that it's meant to address but isn't? All of which is to say, like, on my mind was like, okay, how much does education versus community resources sort of like play a role in community safety? I ended up throwing a bit more money in community resources and a bit less in housing, thinking like, okay, maybe that's sort of a square off, is like, if communities are well invested in, like, the housing things start to take care of themselves and we don't need to subsidize or something. This is the kind of like calculus that was going in my mind.
Oh, well then let's explore. Let's write down the actual numbers then. How much money did you put in health?
I put $20 in health.
Okay, in education?
15.
Housing?
15. And then 25 and 25.
Yeah. Cool. And hold all of your thoughts because we're gonna go to the next person, okay? Vanessa, since you two already started about like how you divided it or how you thought about it with all of your dollars, would you like to go next?
Sure. And I don't feel super strongly about these numbers because like this is all imaginary in my head. So I think I put 25 each for health and housing. So I was thinking like, or yeah, I'll just give numbers. And then I think if I split between the remaining three, it was like 16, 17 for each of the remainder. So let's say 16, 17, whatever, something like that.
And then I'm just gonna go in order if everyone's okay with that, with the names that I have on the list. Maggie.
Sorry, I didn't get very far. I was still kind of processing all of it.
Would you want me to come back? You can go last if you like.
Yeah, you can circle back. I don't know if I'll have numbers yet, but
okay,
yeah.
Cool. Perfectly fine. Frida?
I think my name is misspelled.
Oh, I'm sorry. How do you spell?
No worries. This was really hard for me. I put 20 in each, excluding the carceral system, of course, because it's just like all of these are so intersectional, and there's so many questions that I have in terms of like who is like holding the city accountable to allocate this budget, and like in the end, who will this like really benefit? Because I think sometimes like resources are said to be going to a community and they don't necessarily get there, or not in the way that, or at least this is like speaking from personal experience. So I was really conflicted about this.
Thank you so much for sharing, Fernanda. Apologize for spelling your name wrong. Linda, would you like to go next?
Yes, thanks. So for health, I went with 20, education 10, housing 25, infrastructure 25, and community resources 20. I think with the infrastructure initially was a little lower because as my mind on infrastructure is really on like preparation for climate change and climate crisis and things like that, and thinking that there would be maybe like a separate infrastructure bill for those kinds of things. but also like the idea of like what really trickles down, you know, to communities in need. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing. Louis? Luis?
So yeah, so my numbers were actually exactly like Fernanda's numbers, and the same allocation.
Harry?
Yeah, I'm gonna join the club. I did 20 across the board except for carceral system, which I think like sort of like Corey was saying something that resonated with me, which was sort of like you were talking about how like the carceral system like already takes up such a big part of our budget. Like how can we combat that? And that definitely went into my answer also. And then I was also like, I actually have no idea how I would spend for like housing versus health versus education because like I value all of these things and I also don't know like what the exact breakdown is and I also don't know what the numbers look like currently and so I don't know like whether I'm like adding more money onto like a relatively well-resourced budget category already, if that makes sense. So I know that we are going to take a look at the numbers later on, so I'm really excited about that.
Yeah. I know, I'm giving you all sneak peeks. It's not on purpose. I just want to make that one time. Okay, India.
Hi. I was spending a little more time tweeting than investing.
Oh yeah.
But I would say that my top ones, yeah, again, are health and housing.
Like 50-50.
Oh. I think the other categories are important too. Education, infrastructure, and community resources. I think, okay, I should just say numbers, right? 25.
Like 25, like how Vanessa did, pretty much. She did 25 for health, 16 for education, 25 for housing, 16 for infrastructure, and then 17 for community resources.
I'll do 17 for infrastructure because trains and roads are expensive, I feel like. Yeah.
All right, cool. I am really vibing with this, like so much. Thank you all so much for sharing. I love it when like no one puts anything in carceral. And I think that like a reason that I enjoy it is because they get funding from so many other revenues. So even if they don't get, like even if you don't add it in our city budget, they still will get funding from like the federal or like the state. So it's just like one portion of it, you know? So yeah, but then also I think that it's a new idea of like how if we don't have the police, what then or what systems do we create? And I think that that's a great conversation or an intriguing conversation that I'm ready to be a part of. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I view myself as a community connector. And I really enjoy like talking and connecting with people and doing things like this and pulling all of our resources together because we all are like expertise at something or experts at something, you know? So is this the final budget? Are you all okay with this?
Well, kind of how like if the bottom row would have been like us all coming to consensus, so we just had one set of numbers, one set of numbers that added up to 100, which we kind of, I guess, don't really have time to do if we want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to see those the numbers for the city one because we only have like what 10 minutes left, Ellie? I don't know, but yeah.
I think when we look at the city budget, it'll be pretty clear that it doesn't really line up with the budget that we created today because it has that like little graph, right? And like when we look at the graph, we see actually like the carceral system is like the most well-funded. So we might, even if we can't just get like the exact numbers, I think we have a pretty good idea that like our budget is pretty different from the city's budget.
Yeah, and if it like the pattern that I heard most frequently was just sort of equally across the board, $20 everywhere except for the carceral system, which is like actually sort of remarkably like it's sort of like if we just took the city budget, slashed all of CPD and threw it all into health, education, housing. Because it looks like infrastructure and community resources are still hovering around $20.
Yes. Are there any other insights? Because this is the image that we're looking at now is what is actually the city budget. So like the city actually spent, 31.65 on policing as opposed to like the 3.25, you know what I mean, on housing and infrastructure. And one of the things so on the west side of Chicago, for example, and this is why this is so important to me, there is, across the city of Chicago due to the pandemic, there is a housing or a lack thereof. It's a homeless issue between the ages of 14 to 17. And there's also been correlation between that age range being out between the ages of the times of 10 and 12 and carjackings, right? So in the city, what they're proposing to do is implement a curfew. If a person is homeless and they have nowhere to go, implementing a curfew does not solve the actual problem, but it sounds nice and it makes it seem like an effort is being made because the age ranges of the young people who are committing a crime are, 14 to 17, right? But it's also missing a large piece of that data. And I think that this is why things like this is super important because look at how much money we're giving the police as opposed to implementing our funds to create these infrastructural processes for housing and homes,
I agree with what you said in housing, Kira, and to me it also reflects like a historical precedence in Chicago, like the fact that in like the 90s and the 2000s we saw the city really try and move away from like public housing investment because of like just public housing projects that were falling apart and the city didn't want to do anything about it. And so now we have this unaddressed problem from years like that the city just refused to look at it. And it's actually really, really disappointing to see this really low number.
So now is the time for the call to action. These are just some quick facts. This is basically how the budget is actually broken down in the money. So you can see the Department of Transportation is like 5.7% of the budget. And all of this stuff can be emailed to you as well if you would like to get further information. But I'm gonna leave a second if you want to screenshot the screen also. And then the screenshot on the Mac is like Control Shift and then like 4. I don't know what it is on the PC.
Could you zoom out your slide a little bit? I don't know if anyone else is having this view, but mine's like a little zoomed in.
Oh yeah, try. Hold on, let me go back.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no. Just keep it like this for the next couple of minutes. Because this is like CPS schools. You can see, you can also see the Housing Authority, parks, and the city colleges. And then I can also check in to see if we can share these slides. I'm not for sure on that, but I'm sure Paola will know.
Yeah, Paola would know.
And then the typical budgeting process begins in July, August, and it starts with like the budget request. And then in October, which is or August, we're in September now? Yeah, September, we're in September now. The budgets are projected, and then they're submitted to the mayor, and then it goes for the public hearing. And I feel like there was some news around this process being sped up. I actually think that it was supposed to be extended to December, but like because of, I don't know, our mayor. The process is being accelerated. So yeah. So if you all are like interested, or if you like really want to get more involved and to get your voices heard, please reach out to your alderman. You can become a community connector. We are offering $150 to those folks who are interested in connecting to their alderman via in-person, on phone, or email, but we really want it to be in person or via phone. So that is an opportunity. You can also submit like a post via social media. And we also have index cards. So if you want to like send them a letter or like a message via the postal service or snail mail, we have index cards that are really cute. And that's what we will offer or do if we were in person. We would give you one to fill out on the spot. But social media and emails also works. And then we do have links, like say for instance, you don't know who your alderman is. I could provide you the link today for that to get in tune with that. And then lastly, you can discuss the budget with like people in your community. Just have conversations with folks who are maybe not so knowledgeable or maybe knowledgeable and just have a different opinion. You know, those conversations are meaningful. It's not to change the person's opinion, but just to inform them of the other options that are available. And on time, 7:15. Look at me. I am so proud of myself. Thank you all so much for joining me. My name is Kiera Hart, and it has been a pleasure to be with you. And I am going to leave some space for closing thoughts and comments.
Wow. That was amazing. I'm like, I know that clapping over Zoom is like a nightmare, but that was so great. Thank you so much for leading that. I've learned so much. And now I'll shut up so that other people can ask questions.
Thank you. If there are no closing thoughts or questions for me, I'm going to drop my email in the chat.
Well, then I just wanted to come in and say thanks everyone for joining, and also to point people back to the public agenda, which we shared earlier today. If you are interested in this conversation and others like it, I want to direct you all to the takeaways section at the very bottom, which has not only the links that the People's Budget rather has set up with these like call to actions and all of the next steps and materials that you need to carry them through. I've also linked here a link to become a City Bureau documenter. We run a documenters program where we train and pay people to cover public meetings. Actually, there's one documenter on this call. I have two documenters on this call, and then two people that work for the program. So I'm wondering if maybe like Natalie, you just want to share what the documenters is so that people know.
Yeah, I'm sure Mike could probably do a better job than me, but documenters is just a City Bureau program. We pay people, community members to document public meetings. And so that can be from, like legislative agencies, like any, city council, streets and sanitation, like a bunch of different agencies. I'm gonna also drop in the chat a link to register for our orientation, our upcoming orientation and covering your local government training, which is all you need to get started getting paid to document these meetings. So it's a really fun gig if you want to connect with other civic-minded individuals and just keep better track of what's going on in a city like Chicago. And I think it just aligns just perfectly with this People Budgets work because, we do a lot of sort of looking at the budget as well in our work. So being a documenter is fun. It's easy. You get to talk to me and Nalani a lot, probably. So I'll drop those links in the chat.
All right. Thank you everyone so much for joining us. I'm going to let everyone go because we're 10 minutes over now. And I think everyone should go get some rest and some dinner if they haven't already. Thank you guys so much, especially Troy, Vanessa, Natalie, Nalani, Ebony for writing the blog that's going to be about this workshop, Iban for supporting, and everyone else for attending. Yeah, catch you at the next one.
Bye, everyone.
Thank y'all.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.